A Navy corpsman saved a Marine's life after he went down hard with heat stroke, and welcome back to Good News Friday. This is a story that we came across on DVids, or Divids, whatever you want to say, by Marine Lance Corporal Madison Pascal, and there's a really cool full circle moment at the end, so stick around. It was August of last year, and Marines from 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marine Regiment, a reserve unit, were on Camp Talaga on Camp Pendleton doing some land nav to get ready for a rotation to Okinawa. Talaga is a fairly remote, unforgiving area of Camp Pendleton that's pretty far north, and it's not really used much these days, but in the past it's where Vietnamese refugees were housed after Saigon fell in 1975, and it's also where a good chunk of Heartbreak Ridge was filmed. These days it's mostly used for training reserve Marines and recon Marines and anyone else who needs to suffer a little bit, and it gets fucking hot there because it's wedged in between a bunch of hills. There's practically no shade, and if I remember correctly, I don't think the wind blows there either. Doc Billy Bowie, I think I said that right. Sorry, Doc, if I didn't, but by now you kind of got to know that Marines don't do last names all that well. Was the Doc on duty as the Marines were out in the hills doing their land nav. So Doc's just sitting there in the staging area, sweating his ass off, getting pummeled by the sun, when a radio call comes in saying, "We need Bowie out here now." Unsure of what awaited him, Doc jumped in the Humvee and they started speeding towards the situation. They couldn't reach the Marine in the Humvee, so Doc Bowie had to get out and sprint up the hill, where he found him stripped down to his skivvies and unresponsive. As Docs do, he went to work immediately and inserted a nasopharyngeal airway, because at that point, the real risk was that his tongue was swelling up so much that he was going to suffocate, so he had to get it so that he could breathe. Once he could breathe, he was still unresponsive, so Doc and the other Marines put him on a stretcher and started carrying him down the Humvee, where they covered him in ice, and then Doc gave him a nice little sternum rub to bring him to. He was so desperate to keep him alive, he even told him not to go towards the light. Shortly after getting down to the staging area, a helicopter arrived to medevac him to a hospital, where he ultimately recovered. A few days later, the Marine found Bowie and thanked him for saving his life, and told him that even though he couldn't move, he could hear everything he said, which honestly sounds like a fucking nightmare. Alright, so here's the full circle moment. Bowie's family is from Vietnam, and his grandpa was a soldier in the Vietnamese army when Saigon fell in 1975. Desperate to get his family out of South Vietnam, but with no other choices, he loaded them all up in a small boat and headed out into the open ocean. After drifting for 2 days, they finally spotted a ship, which turned out to be the USS Hepburn. Fearing that they wouldn't be picked up, his grandpa punched holes in the boat to force it to sink and force the USS Hepburn to rescue them. We weren't able to figure out if Bowie's grandpa was one of those processed at Talaga, but it's entirely possible because they processed tens of thousands there. Regardless, the grandson of Vietnamese refugees saved the life of a Marine at the very same spot where thousands of Viet Marines started their new lives, and that's pretty fucking cool. If you've got a good news story that you want us to share next Friday, go ahead and send it to my email at kyle.gunn@taskandpurpose.com. Until then, you can read all of our stories at taskandpurpose.com and follow us right here for more news from the military community.